Hey Death Stalker here. So I thought I'd talk to you about my very first crash I ever had when I was racing motorcycles. Road racing motorcycles, that is. And it was actually the first race I had with my 85 spec Honda 250. And I had missed most of the season. And because of that, I was actually put at the back of the grid. It's just the way they start. We didn't do qualifying like they do in the Grand Prix, where they actually time you. What you did was we have a heat race on Saturday, and the winner of the heat race had pole, and third was third on the grid, and so forth. So I didn't have any races in this season, so I had no grid position. So I basically was put at the back of the grid. Now, at that particular time, 250 was pretty popular and pretty competitive, and there was actually 31 bikes on the grid, and I was slotted in at number 30. So I've been out for the practice sessions we were allowed, so I got the feel of the bike, and I was very happy with it. And it was actually the first time I ever started so far back in the grid, you could barely see the flagman. And he came out, got us. We were all lined up, ready to go, and he dropped the flag, and everybody took off. And it literally looked like half the grid was in the first turn before I even started moving. But I got hard on the gas, and a lot of the guys at the back of the grid were driving older style Yamahas and whatnot, so they weren't really fast, and they also didn't really accelerate very fast out of the corners. So I had very little trouble in passing a lot of these guys. Into turn 2, I probably passed about 5 or 6 guys. In turn 3, when I came out of turn 3, I was 10th place. And turn 4, which was a left-hand corner, which actually was my strong point. Just for the record, I happen to be left-handed, and it's just one of the things that left-handed people do well in left-handed turns, and right-handed people do better in right-handed turns. It's just genetics. So I was lining up to pass the guy in 9th, and he was actually trying to outbrake me into the corner. So and then he actually started to drift a little wide, so I actually had to go wide to not hit him. And when you're leaned over, dragging your knee, and something in the back of my head said, look ahead. And I just happened to look ahead, and the track was going left. I was not going left enough. There was no way in this world I was going to make this corner. So I had like a split second to make my decision. Now, this track is actually pretty flat. If you run off the track, in most cases you just run off. As long as you don't try to grab a handful of brakes to slow you down, you'll just lose some speed and get back, probably lose 8 or 10 spots. But you get back in. It was like about a 10 or 15 lap race. I could make those spots up. So I had to straighten the bike up and drive off the track. So that was my plan. My plan didn't include the drainage ditch. They had this drainage ditch that was pretty shallow, but it was very wide. I came off the track. I hit that ditch, and literally the bike stopped, and I went through the bubble of my GP bike, literally like a bullet through a pane of glass, and went straight on through, hit the ground with a flying shoulder smash that would have made one of those wrestlers like Hulk Hogan proud. The only problem is I was giving the ground a shoulder smash, and we all know the ground is bigger and stronger than us. Now, the funny part was, in the previous year racing, all these guys were always joking about, you know, if they crash, what they're going to do. And the one thing I always say, well, if I crash, I'm going to lay on the ground and make certain I'm okay before I'm one of those idiots running up back to the bike, you know, to try to get back in the race. And that didn't happen. I was up and running back to the bike before the bike had finished falling over. And I actually beat the marshals to the bike. I actually had my hands on the bike. The handlebars, the one handlebar was actually twisted out, but that was because I was hanging on to it when I went to the bubble. And I just basically smashed it really hard with my hand to knock it back to where more or less it should have been. And then I was trying to get the bike into neutral so I could bump start it, and I couldn't get in there. And what actually had happened was the shifter had been bent in against the shifter rod, and there was no way in this world I was going to be able to get it back out. So that's when I realized that my race is over. So I'm sitting there talking to the marshal, and the marshal's saying, "Are you okay?" And I go, "Well, I think so." And then all of a sudden I realized that my left arm wasn't exactly working the way it was supposed to, and I went, uh-oh. So I unzipped the front of my leathers and I stuck my hand in there, and yeah, I broke my collarbone. So I said to the marshals, I broke my collarbone, so they're going to have to push my bike in. And so I just walked across the infield. Had to, you know, you have to, there's rules for crossing the track when it's an active track and whatnot. And you know, eventually I got across and just walked into the medical center. And the racing community is really good. Like I had crashed and my bike was back in the pits before I had even made the medical center, because the couple of racers who were watching me race had gone over, picked my bike up from the marshals, and had pushed it right into the pits. And the fun began. It's like I'm in there, and the doctor in there was apologizing to a racer because he's saying, "Sorry, I got to do it, I got to do it." The racer's like, "No, doc, don't do it." And I'm sitting there thinking like he's got to cut the guy's leg off or something, and it's like, and he's like, "Man," he says, "Doc, those leathers are brand new." And the doc says, "I can't cut your leg unless I cut your leathers off. I'm sorry, man." And it was actually pretty funny. The doctor was pretty cool, and he looks over at me and he says, "What happened to you?" I says, "I think I broke my collarbone." He says, "Okay, have a seat. I'll look at you in a minute." So he, the guy who had crashed actually had broken his leg, so he had to access it to set the bone and whatnot. But he looked at my shoulder and he said, yeah, I think you got a broken collarbone. You're gonna have to go into the hospital, get it x-rayed and whatnot. And I had friends who broke collarbones before, and I know they put you on this, they basically move it around to put it back where it's supposed to be, and then they put this silly little strap around your shoulders and along your back and whatnot to sort of hold it in place so it heals up. And so I was hanging out with the guys, and I was talking to them, and they said, "Well, you know," they asked me what I was going to do. I says, "Well, I got to go to the hospital, so I better go to the hospital," because it's like I'm not going to be racing. And the other guy, a couple guys says, "Don't worry, we'll get your bike home for you," so I didn't have to worry about anything. So the guys actually brought all my gear that I couldn't put back in my truck myself, and drove down to the hospital. And in the hospital, I felt like it was in one of those World War I movies where it's like you got all these wounded soldiers laying around, except it was all racers. And one of the guys there was a good friend of mine named Andrew, who was one of the top 250 racers, and apparently he had his brakes seized in warm-up in the morning. And I hadn't seen it because I was at the other side of the track when it happened, and he literally went over the handlebars and he broke his wrist. And he ended up having to get about 5 pins put in his wrist. So he's sitting there, and I'm talking to him, and I'm talking to his dad, and there's some other guys there, and the nurses are all upset. They absolutely hated the racetrack. They went like, I just wish they could bomb that track and burn it down. And because I guess every weekend there's a race on there to get busy. So I go in, I see the thing, get my x-ray, and get my little strap thing put on. And so the next thing I had to do is actually I had to get home. So I just, you know, hopped in my truck and drove home. So I actually got home around 11 o'clock that night. Now, to put you in perspective, I had crashed at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And although I had broken my collarbone, I was in no pain. The doctors, the hospital gave me no painkillers. Well, I was feeling no pain because I was running off of pure adrenaline. And it wasn't until the next morning that I got up that I realized how much my shoulder hurt. And I ended up with like almost a month of that before I was actually able to do anything. By that time, there was only like one race left in the season, and like my shoulder still wasn't 100%, so I didn't bother going out for that race because it was always like the end of October, beginning of November, and the weather's so iffy then. So that was my first race in a Honda and my first crash. So hope you enjoyed it. Talk to you later.